Among the populations being targeted for tougher immigration enforcement are local residents from Southeast Asia. In Greater Boston, the enforcement has mainly been a concern for the Vietnamese and Cambodian communities, and community organizations have been trying to help. To tell us about the efforts are the organizing director with the Asian American Resource Workshop, Kevin Lamb, and the director of the Asian Outreach Project at Greater Boston Legal Services, Bethany Lee. Thank you both for being with us. I'll start with Bethany. Talk about the size of the undocumented population of at least Asian background and how it is that people who came here legally as refugees have to worry about being deported.
Well, in Massachusetts, the undocumented population among Asian Americans is actually quite large. It makes up about 28.5% of the undocumented population in Massachusetts. When we talk about Southeast Asians specifically, many people actually came over here as refugees and after the war in Southeast Asia, and they adjusted to become green card holders. And when they were young, some of them, as a result of bullying in schools and just being teenagers and getting into fights, people were convicted of crimes, pled guilty to crimes, and ordered deported from the United States as a result.
So we're talking about a whole spectrum of people here who might have some kind of criminal problem, whether it's a small one or a larger one. But I guess, have you been able to see much of a pattern here? Are they concentrating on the really bad people, or maybe not?
No, it's a range, and I represent someone who has been deported at this point now for criminal offenses that are no longer deportable offenses, so he shouldn't have been deported at all. And the range of crimes that we're talking about, they're vast.
Kevin, this affects the people who are at risk for deportation, but they have relatives, they have children. I mean, what's that like?
Yeah, I think the act of deportation itself on the Southeast Asian community isn't just the physical act of removing people, and it doesn't just have a physical impact. There's a lot of emotional, mental impact on the family members and their loved ones as well, of the actual act of like ripping someone away from a community that they've actually reestablished here in the US, and also ripping loved ones away from each other, where they've started lives and families here in the US together.
And I imagine the wars that precipitated these events as having ended in the 1970s. Like we were talking about people, they may have been here for quite a long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the war that took place in Southeast Asia, while in the mainstream narrative know it as the Vietnam War, it was a war that actually impacted Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. So I refer to it as the war in Southeast Asia, right? I think even though the war itself in textbooks...
Just in Cambodia, more than 1 million people were killed, right?
Yeah, but I think just in textbooks, it says that the war ended in 1975, but the collateral damage on the people and the land after the war is still present today through the mass carpet bombing that took place in Laos and the Khmer genocide that took place in Cambodia, right? And also the impact of the war that happened directly in Vietnam.
What's it like if someone who fled all that goes back to it nowadays? I mean, have things settled down and it's no big deal, or is it maybe traumatic for them to go back?
Yeah, I think it ranges for a lot of the Southeast Asian community. A lot of, as Bethany was sharing, a lot of the community members who are now facing deportation are those very community members who were children or youth. One, who either fled with their families from Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, or two, were born in refugee camps and have actually never stepped foot in those countries, are the ones who are now facing deportation back to those countries, right? And so if we think about it, the same country, the US, that was actually involved and played a role in the war that took place in Southeast Asia, and took Southeast Asian communities into the US, is actually the same country that is now threatening to deport Southeast Asian community members.
Bethany, what have you heard about that, about the possibilities of people sort of going back into trauma if they were sent back?
Sure. I mean, I have a client who was deported in one of the rounds of raids last year in 2018, and he had here been diagnosed with major depressive disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so the first several weeks of him returning to Cambodia were re-traumatizing, right? Because he had left remembering and seeing images of kids tending to their dead parents in fields, and that's his last memory of Cambodia. And and when he returns, he's reliving a lot of that.
I imagine that in a lot of cases, you're dealing with people who have a long history of playing by the rules, getting letters from the government, showing up for interviews and things like that. What's your advice to them now, given what's happening with the climate of enforcement?
Everyone's case is different. I think it's incredibly important for people to reach out to community organizations, to religious institutions, in order to get connected to legal institutions that people trust, so that the advice that they're getting is correct. Because say in this particular community, laws change all the time, and whereas say 20 years from now, people weren't regularly getting advised of the fact that if they plead guilty, they're going to be deported. Now that's required. And so there's a lot of things that we can do with their cases to see what's possible to reopen them.
Yeah. Coming back to Kevin, of course, you're trying to help these people with volunteers. How exactly are you doing that?
Yeah, so 2 years ago, as like the Asian Outreach and Asian American Resource Workshop started organizing in response to deportations happening in the community, a lot of the work that we were doing was through rapid response. So just letting community members here in Massachusetts know that there are actually resources that the Southeast Asian community can access. So whether that's through community organizations like Asian American Resource Workshop or seeking legal help through the Asian Outreach Unit. So a lot of that was doing the outreach to community members to let them know. And from there, we've kind of been doing fundraising campaigns to support impacted families and their loved ones who are directly targeted by deportation, to provide them ongoing assistance around some of that, especially if a loved one has been deported, to try to help at least rehabilitate and restabilize their lives after something like that happens. And also accompanying community members to their check-ins with ICE that happen.
Bethany, how does that help community members going to a check-in?
I mean, it shows ICE and the government that people are paying attention, right? Because, I think for a long time, especially in Massachusetts, despite the large Cambodian American community, people haven't been paying attention to the fact that there have been mass detentions going on here, right, of Cambodian Americans. Definitely it's happening at the border, but the more people pay attention to what's going on here in our own backyards, I think it's incredibly important.
Right. Kevin, if people want to help, what kind of skills do you need from them? I mean, certainly speaking languages would help, but in addition to that, what do you need?
Yeah, so I think having a skill and ability to speak another language other than English, especially a Southeast Asian language, so like Vietnamese, Lao, Khmer, Hmong, right? Like that would actually really be helpful for the community facing deportation. But I think the other piece is like actually people willing to actually come out and support around deportation. And I think a part of that, the ways in which we've been training our organizers and volunteers who want to support is before folks really want to support like the organizing efforts around Southeast Asian deportation is to really understand the context and history of how Southeast Asian communities got to the US and the ways in which that has actually in ways funneled community members to the prison to deportation pipeline that we're seeing now.
And Bethany, if people want to find out some more information, if they want to help or if they need help, is there some way they can follow up with Greater Boston Legal Services?
Yes, they can contact our office. We also have legal clinics that happen in Chinatown and Dorchester every single week, and they happen in Vietnamese and other Asian languages.
And Kevin, if people want to contact the workshop?
Yeah, they can go to our website at aarw.org, and then my contact information is there if they want to reach out as well.